Tough to top this morning, but I think we can do it. Our first talk today is going to be from John Townsend. John is the manager of information security for DTE Energy, and he's been with DTE for about 19 years in various positions, but right now he is standing between the bad guys and our ability to have power, which is kind of important here in Michigan. So he's going to talk about the threat to the utility industry. So please welcome John Townsend from DTE Energy.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And of course, I get my first text message. I'm just curious to know the audience, how many folks here are from industry? Raise your hand. And how many folks are from the academic world? Okay, good. Thank you, that helps. Don, thank you for that great introduction. I appreciate your kind words. As Don mentioned, my name is John Townsend. I've been in the IT business my entire career, which is more years than I am willing to admit. And about the last 8 or so of those years have been spent in cybersecurity. Now, I entered just at the right time, because in 2007, a video was released to the press, supposedly leaked to the press, and is quite prominent, and it demonstrates the Aurora vulnerability that was exploited by Idaho National Labs. Now, what you're going to see in a video here in a few minutes is a electric generator that is connecting to the grid and then disconnecting from the grid and rapidly reconnecting. And every time it reconnects, when it tries to synchronize, there's this major jolt of the generator and literally parts start to fly off. So those of you, probably we have electrical engineers in the audience, and I don't want to know that because I'm not one. But the way to think about this is if you took 2 magnets and put them up to a pane of glass, they would hold together. They would be in sync. If I then remove my hand from the one on my left and turned the one on the right, the torque of the one on the left in order to get back in sync would be tremendous. So Idaho National Labs bought a multi-million-dollar generator. They hooked it up to their own little electrical grid, and they invited their hackers to come in and see if they could exploit any vulnerabilities in order to demonstrate this thing, and they did. So I have to exit this, and I'm going to. This is like 1 minute. Anybody? By the way, did anybody? I was going to ask this question. Did anybody see last week's Nova on the threat of cyber warfare? Okay, I see a couple of hands. You guys can do your email for the next few minutes, because they went into a lot more detail about this particular vulnerability that I'm going to go into. But this is going to show you what happened to that generator. So this was one of the first demonstrations of a cyber attack doing physical destruction to hardware.
Welcome to track.
Oh, thank you. So it's one of the first times that we've seen a cyber attack, at least in the electric industry, come in and do physical damage. So you can imagine if that had happened on a grand scale, what would have happened to the electrical grid. Fortunately, it didn't happen in a grand scale. So it doesn't stop there. You are all familiar with all of the hacks and the breaches that have been occurring recently. These are just some recent headlines. And I think you would all appreciate the fact that the loss of electricity in a widespread area is going to put a lot of stress on that area. So the electric and gas industry, probably more so the electric, but the electric and gas industry get more than their fair share attention of headlines. And some of these are kind of humorous. I'll show you this next slide, which is just more of the same type of things. The electrical industry grid is at risk. The news loves to point that out first because it's scary, it's worrisome, and rightfully so, it is worrisome. None of us would want to be without power for any extended period of time. In fact, it could result in the loss of life if it took a while to do. My favorite headline up here is the one on the lower left that talks about ISIS attacking the electrical grid. The subtitle that we didn't put up there is, "And they're just not very good at it," which I'm grateful for. So we are being attacked. The electrical grid, the electrical industry is being attacked by different nation states, sponsors, organizations, et cetera, and we know it. And we've done some things about it. Oops, sorry. So in 2011, the Edison Electrical Institute, which is the trade association for all of the investor-owned utilities, got together with member companies and we developed the top 9 threats. Now I know it says 10 up there, but we initially could only think of 9. And it wasn't until the 2014 update that we came up with the 10th threat, and you're going to see that one today. Then the AGA, which is the gas side equivalent of EEI, followed suit, and they came up with also a set of threats where there's a major overlap, but there are a few differences in them. So not only did we identify the threats, that was the easy part. We further went on, and you're going to see in the following slides, we further went on to identify what the potential impact is if that threat is realized in the electric or gas sectors, who the potential threat actors are, and what vectors they might come in on, and most importantly, the mitigations that could help you prevent these from being realized. I wanted to give accreditation to the people that really put this work together, because a lot of the words you're going to see on the following slides come directly from the EEI, AGA, Chertoff Group, and a lot of other folks. So let's dig into it. Let's get to the bottom line. Here it is. These are the top 10 threats. Even the casual observer would notice that these are not all cyber threats. And I never said that this presentation was about just cyber. There's a combination of cyber and physical in the top 10. And you also may notice there's nothing here that's really unique to the electric or the gas sector. And that's why I asked how many people were actually in different industries. So I'm going to go into each one of these. I'm going to move through them pretty quickly given the time frame I have. But years of thought have gone into this stuff. Now, the first thing we did as we started to put this together is we realized, can you read that in the back, I hope? Shoot. Oh, well. That was the largest font we could get to and still contained it in 2 pages. So I'm not going to read these to you. You do not want me reading these to you. But Ari did me a major piece of help this morning when he explained the NIST cybersecurity framework. These categories, the phases you see there over on the left, we had originally used the FEMA, but then with President Obama's order and the creation of the NIST cybersecurity framework, we changed it to match that framework. I was going to spend about a half hour explaining those categories to you, which would have been thrilling. But Ari did an excellent job of explaining them, so I'm not going to explain, but you will see, at least I was hoping you would be able to see, that there are a few that I've highlighted, so I'm just going to touch upon a few of these. And the first one is just so relevant to every single category, and you're going to get tired of me repeating it as we go through. You need to know what your critical assets are, whether they're physical or they're cyber. And when do you need to know it? Before you have an incident, before something happens. So get out there and identify what they are. If you're in the security business at all, or you've read any articles on it, you'll be familiar with the phrase that your weakest link is your employee. And I am a major advocate of security awareness training for all employees so that they recognize when they're being phished, so that they know that something unusual is happening here that's not quite right, I better call somebody. And then down in the detect, you see the information sharing. Again, I hate to bombard you with these phrases, but there's an old axiom in the security industry. I, as a single company, have to be right 100% of the time if I am to avoid an incident or a breach. A bad actor only has to be right once in about 1 million attempts. So I can't possibly know all the threats that are out there. I can't possibly know all of the best practices. I'm only one company. So under detect, I do a lot of work in sharing information. The local FBI, very helpful. Governor Snyder has put forth a significant effort to share information with the state police. We have our own ESISAC, et cetera, et cetera. So very important. And then we have the last under respond. Again, I'll ask the question. The answer is obvious. When do you want to develop and test an incident response plan? Before, during, or after an incident? So develop it, and then don't put it on a shelf. The paper will turn yellow. Practice it. So let's get into some of the threats. Here's the first one, coordinated cyber attack. This is a pretty simple one. This is where one or more bad actors simultaneously or near simultaneously attack multiple critical systems on your network. Whether it's a physical attack or it's a cyber attack, they go after it, and their purpose is to bring down or disrupt operations. Now, they usually attack communication systems, either private or public, and of course, your critical software systems. Now, in our case, in the case of the electrical grid, We have systems that actually run the grid. They're called SCADA systems, or they're called ICS systems or EMS systems. They all stand for the same thing. They are the things that are controlling the grid. Those are the things that they're going to try to attack. And how are they going to try to attack them? I'm over on the vector side here. They're going to try to attack them through links, communication links, because they're frequently not hardened. They're going to bring in rogue devices. So if they can get access to a critical facility, they're going to bring in a device, they're going to plant it there, and they're going to use that device to attack you. Or through remote access. Who remembers, I already mentioned it this morning, he stole one of my lines. Who remembers the Target breach? How did they get in? A third-party provider who had unknowingly become compromised, and then they just laterally moved their way across. What are the consequences? Well, the worst case consequence is that physical damage is caused, just like we saw with the Aurora generator. And things go down, generating plants go down, electricity cannot be supplied, and there's a blackout. The more insidious, and if I was a bad actor, this is the route I would take personally, but I'm not a bad actor, I assure you. The more insidious route is not to physically attack the hardware, but to feed misinformation to the operators that are running the hardware so that they make incorrect decisions that either result in the destruction of equipment or just shutting down the grid. Mitigations, since you can't read these. Again, once you've identified your critical and key assets out in the field, make sure they're secure. That's that first item under protect. It's amazing how many times people just put devices out in the field and they don't do anything to protect them from either physical or cyber attack. Harden your networks, not just your operational networks, harden both your corporate and your operational network. All too often they are connected. Monitor for unusual activity. I'm down under detect. Monitor for unusual activity and then alarm on that. It doesn't do, it's not even half the battle just to monitor. You need to alarm. You need somebody to respond to it. And then in the case of the electric utility, if we detect that there is a cascading failure, as we saw in 2003, we will disconnect from the grid in order to save the electricity for our region. Number two, one of my favorites. We've all heard of advanced persistent threats. What's the most famous one out there? Stuxnet, right? Stuxnet. Probably the most famous, most renowned APT. What do they try to do? They exploit network vulnerabilities. They find a safe hiding spot somewhere in the network where they can do reconnaissance work to figure out where are the important assets in the network. And their ultimate goal is to exfiltrate value-added information from that network or cause physical destruction. In the case of Sony, in the case of the Iran nuclear plant, they did both. Sony lost tons of information and now lost thousands of computers. In the case of RSA, also an APT, they just lost intellectual intelligence. How do they do this? Well, the likely targets are the security controls themselves. I'm fond of telling my boss I can spend millions of dollars, which I don't necessarily spend, building the ultimate perimeter around DTE Energy so that nobody can get in. But then here comes that phishing email, just flies right on over. All of that security just fishes, and Don opens up his email. He sees that he has a bill that's due today, and if he doesn't respond, blah, 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 blah. And Don very naturally clicks on that. They're also going to target software and firmware and plant malware in that. I talked about over on the right-hand side, I talked about reconnaissance already. Stuxnet exploited 5 zero-day vulnerabilities. Most don't exploit any. They don't need to. A successful attack could, in the case of the electric industry, could result in blackouts, mainly due to the loss of control or situational awareness. And by situational awareness, I mean the operators can no longer see what is happening out in the field through their instruments, because this APT, as Stuxnet did, tell them that everything is operating okay. So, mitigations. Start at the top. Do you know everybody in your organization that has elevated privileges? That was a question. Not a big response. You need to know everybody in your organization, whether they're an IT person or they're out in the field, that have elevated privileges, and I would strongly recommend that you invoke some sort of two-factor authentication. Because when that keylogger gets installed on that admin's machine, if they're using two-factor authentication, they won't be able to get beyond that machine. They will not be able to move laterally across the network as they did in the case of Target. You're going to see this theme reported over and over again on the protect. You have to establish a pattern of your network usage. Most admins do the same thing day in, day out. They go to this machine, they go to that machine, they go to another machine. Normally your traffic flow is about the same. Sometimes it peaks because it's the end of the month and you're closing your books or you're gathering customer information, but you can establish what that norm is. And then, you've heard me say this before, monitor and alarm when you see something unusual, something out of the ordinary. And then lastly, down here at the bottom, again, participate in those threat sharing forums, whether it's local government, whether it's within your own industry, state, local, federal level. All right, moving on to number 3. Disruption of voice and data communication. This is one that's a little bit different in that this can result from either a cyber attack or a physical attack. And the real purpose of this is to cripple the business processes that depend upon that communication in order to operate. It's not necessarily trying to destroy a nuclear plant or destroy a fossil generation plant. They just want, they want to interrupt the processes that are going on. The likely targets, third party, whether it's AT&T, it's Comcast, it's Verizon, I don't want to pick on anybody in particular, attacking them. But we also, well, I won't say we also, at one point, way before my time, DTE Energy, at the time known as Detroit Edison, was the 9th largest telephone company in Michigan, because we have a lot of private communications that we use in order to operate our business. Those are constantly under attack. So that's another target attack, and you'll see over here on your right the types. A successful attack will result in operators not having the information they need to make decisions, or in a lot of cases, we've evolved to the point where we are automating that decision making based upon the information that's coming into us. And if that information isn't coming into us, then either decisions won't be made and there will be no actions taken, or the wrong decisions will be made. And if this occurs in connection with a natural event like a hurricane or an earthquake or a major snowstorm, it can just exponentially raise the impact. So mitigations. This should sound pretty familiar for you by now. Look at the first one. Know your critical communication systems before something happens, and equally important, know who the provider is. Probably most of us don't use just one provider for telecom. We use multiple providers for that. So know who those people are and coordinate with them on having alternative routes established. No telecom company I'm aware of has just one route into, for instance, a DTE Energy. There's multiple routes, and we may call upon them to use one of those alternate routes. You may, if worse comes to worse, you may actually have to station personnel at critical facilities to make sure the communication is going on. And then lastly, provide you can recover if you have redundancy and backup. Moving on to number 4, this is the blended attack, where you most likely have multiple attackers with a coordinated campaign that involves both a physical attack as well as a cyber attack. An example might be, this didn't actually happen, so don't quote me on this because I'm making this up. You may have heard of the Metcalf substation physical attack out in California, PG&E, Metcalf, right? So that was a physical attack on that substation. There were multiple shooters at the substation. They could have simultaneously, or somebody else in coordination, could have simultaneously launched a cyber attack against a generation facility. So you take out a substation and you take out a generation facility, and you have a major problem. The likely targets for this would be generation plants, transformers, because as you know, we stepped the electricity down from when it was created at the plant down to it gets to 110 in your household. Or key physical equipment and critical systems. They want to go after the critical systems. They don't want to go after that Dell computer that we all have 2 or 3 hidden under our desks. You see over on the right there, explosive devices. If people get into, if they can get into a substation and they can plant an explosive device, they can do a lot of damage very, very quickly in a physical attack. We also worry about aircraft and now drones attacking the transmission towers. You bring down a couple of those transmission towers and you're going to have quite a blackout. So the results being here that a successful attack could result in a prolonged blackout that could actually cascade across multiple regions depending on the extent of the attack or the extent of the equipment that fails within the initial attack region. Mitigations. This mitigation, most of these mitigations revolve around a single theme, and that theme is highlighted in the first bolded point up there. Cross communications. So you've got a blended attack going on. In a lot of organizations, physical security is separate from cybersecurity. So I worry about cybersecurity. I don't necessarily worry about the Metcalf event going on because that's not me. But wouldn't it be better if, when a physical attack occurred, that the gentleman that heads that up was contacting me and said, hey, I've got this going on. Do you have anything going on? And vice versa. So that will take some training, cross-training between the two groups so they can better understand what they're talking about. Physical control to critical facilities so that we make sure that unauthorized vehicles or pedestrians don't get into the facility and plant those devices that I talked about. I talked about the alert, a guard force. We have a 7 by 24-hour guard force that has monitors all over the DTE energy area that is monitoring critical facilities, and they do respond to those facilities by either dispatching local law enforcement or, if there's a DTE place close enough, dispatch them. Sabotage, insider sabotage. This threat can come from a disgruntled employee, could come from a disgruntled or just an ex-employee. It could come from a third party. In fact, the DHS just announced this week, a spokesperson for the DHS announced this week that they now believe the Metcalf shooting was done by insiders. That was 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, that took effect, or that occurred. So these folks, these insiders, whether they're third party or disgruntled employees, have proprietary information that allows them to do even more damage than somebody on the outside. They may have elevated privileges that they can use in order to wreak the havoc on your equipment or on your software systems that the normal outsider doesn't have or has to go to a much greater extent. What are the targets they're going to attack? Well, mainly two. They're going to attack the expensive and hard to replace equipment. Some equipment, and I'm sure it's true for most industry, some equipment are multi-million dollars and take months or even a year to replace. That's what they're going to go after. Or the operational control systems. Again, the systems that are actually controlling the electrical grid. How does this happen? What are the vectors? Social engineering is a vector. The unauthorized access or misuse of legitimate access to systems so that they can misconfigure a system to cause the damage. The likely impact, depending on the level of the insider's knowledge, we could result in a loss of power, could result in a blackout, it could result in the loss of situational awareness from the operators, et cetera. Mitigations, when you do, and I know you're all doing it, when you do that enterprise-wide threat analysis, make sure that one of the factors you consider is that insider threat. The insider threat is often overlooked because we're so focused on somebody from the outside getting in. Conduct background checks and pay attention to them. It wasn't at this company, but another company I was at was talking to somebody in HR. They had gotten a call from an unhappy spouse. And the unhappy spouse said, my husband was convicted of felonies out in Arizona. I'm working here in Michigan. He was convicted of felonies out in Arizona. And they said, oh, well, we got this guy, no problem. He probably falsified his application, and that probably didn't show up in his background check. Wrong in both cases. He wrote it on his application, and it was clearly in his background check. We ran it, we never checked it. So not only do that, monitor employees' responses. We're going through downsizings, we're going through a bunch of different factors. So monitor those stress levels of employees, track what they're doing. And then in the case of an insider threat, be sure and collect and save data for further investigation. Pandemic, number 6. A pandemic is the severe outbreak or outbreak of severe virus, absenteeism can grow as high as 50% in some studies. There's 3 causes for absenteeism. The employee is actually sick and can't come to work, the employee is taking care of a sick family member, or the employee does not want to get sick and refuses to come into work. There's no real targets in this particular scenario. The dissemination or the vectors for this are the unintentional Ebola type of situation, or a terrorist organization who is purposely sending in infected people, individuals, into populous areas, intentionally sending them in. Pandemic itself isn't going to do a lot of damage. What's going to do the damage is as that absenteeism grows, less skilled, less knowledgeable people are going to be responsible for running your critical systems, and they're more likely to make mistakes or not know what decisions to make. Mitigations, which business functions are most important, and you're going to pay attention to those. That's where you're going to keep your most skilled resources. Maintain those SOPs and those COOPs, because as you have alternative workers come in, they're going to use those things. Develop and test emergency response plan. Maintain contingency plans with vendors. So as your parts start to dwindle, you want to make sure that those critical resources are available. And then finally, on the bottom, maintain relationships with local clinics where you might be able to get the vaccines that help your employees. 7, supply chain disruption, one of my favorites. And it's my favorite because there can be an intentional supply chain interruption, as in, I want to put malware into my product, deliver it to customers, et cetera, et cetera. The more difficult one to detect is those sub-tier suppliers to your supplier that are putting malware in. And that supplier doesn't even know it, and he or she, that company, delivers it to you not knowing that there's a piece of malware in there. One of the best exercises I ever participated in was the supply chain compromise. The piece of malware sat inside one of our critical systems for 6 months. This was an exercise, not a true event. It was an exercise. Sat inside for 6 months. It's called a time bomb. And then the time bomb went off. No backups in the world are going to save you because just too much time has passed. So supply chain consequences can cause damage, as I just described, but also they can cause just the dwindling of parts. As parts become more and more scarce, they are going to, you're not going to be able to stay at full operations. Mitigations, evaluate your suppliers. Be aware of the sub-tier relationships that your suppliers have. Inspect parts that you receive from your suppliers to see if something happened to that part in transit before it arrived at your facility. Catastrophic human failure. Well, my gosh, we all make mistakes. What the heck? And you can ask the operators at 3 Mile Island. Anybody remember 3 Mile Island? Okay. Part of that was human error. People were just making mistakes. And since it's unintentional, there's no real targets. But over on the right here, the job performance errors, things that are misconfigured. The impact are disruptions to the facility. Mitigations here are really very straightforward. Conduct assessments, maintain robust operating procedures. Some people call them standard work instructions. Do pre-job briefs every time so that employees can identify what errors could possibly occur before they go out and do the job. Continually learn from your experiences because accidents are going to happen. So conduct after-action reviews and implement those recommendations that come out of those after-action reviews. Intentional electromagnetic interference. How many electrical engineers do I have in the audience? Oh, I'm actually glad to hear that. So this is an intense electromagnetic field that renders electronic devices either useless or makes them malfunction. Has anybody read the book 1 Second After? You need to read that book. This is a nation-state attack on the United States. So if you blow up a nuclear device at a certain level in the atmosphere, you will have this EMI effect massively. In this case, I'm talking about local. I'm talking about somebody getting into a critical facility and setting off such a device and all of the electronic components malfunctioning. They're going to hit substations, they're going to hit all the things you see over there on the left. The paths to doing this are unshielded or very poorly shielded facilities or communications. And as I mentioned here on the likely impacts, they are going to be most likely localized to a single plant. Take a nation state or a state sponsor to launch a massive attack. Remediations, evaluate your facilities to make sure that they have the right level of protection. Not every facility needs the level of protection. Again, I'm back to our perimeter security. Make sure only authorized people. Make sure that you escort non-employees into your critical facilities and be with them at all times. At DTE Energy, we have spaces in our facilities where unless I have clearance to enter unescorted, I, as an employee, have to be escorted. So if you've got people from outside, make sure that they are escorted. And keep a sufficient supply of things on hand. Okay, lastly, number 10. My second favorite, distributed denial of service. I won't ask for a raise of hand. Oh, I will ask. Anybody in the finance industry? I only see 1 or 2 hands. The finance industry, I think the year before last, they were inundated with denial of services. What is a distributed denial of service attack? It's an attack where you throw so much false requests at a piece of network equipment or an application server, a CPU, a disk array, it does not have time to respond to legitimate business requests. So for all practical purposes, if it was your website, public-facing website, and you were getting a denial of service, that website would disappear from the network because it couldn't respond to that consumer trying to get into it. Yeah, I can do that. So let me just look at the mitigations here. Work with your ISPs. I'm down here under protect. Recognize that the DDoS event is probably a cover for something else. 74% are a cover for something else. So, in conclusion, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I appreciate you putting up with me. And I think you will agree with me that these are not unique to the electric and gas sectors. They apply to all of us. So with that, I think I have a minute or two. I got 5 minutes to take any questions. Now, and by the way, there's about 6 other DTE Energy people out in the audience here, so I could throw them to you at any time, and I know where you're sitting. Go ahead, sir, please.
Edward Vilmetti. So one of the biggest problems that the electric power industry has is storms, where a large storm will come through and there will be a big power outage as a result. And I was surprised actually to see that you didn't have any natural disasters on your list of things that cause difficulties for your systems. I'll point you to Hurricane Sandy, or
Right.
Superstorm Sandy, where a lot of utility companies had difficulty informing their customers of when their power would be restored. The most recent, a couple months ago, storm in the Northwest that completely took out BC Hydro's website. They didn't have any way to inform their customers of what was going on.
Right, right.
And I want you to address not just the cyber side of this problem, but where the distributed denial of service attack is really your customers trying to figure out what's going on with your utility and the infrastructure necessary
Sure.
to handle 100 or 1,000 times more
Sure.
than normal load.
That's a great question. And I can tell you, since Superstorm Sandy, the electric utility has joined together, mainly through EEI, to learn lessons from what happened in that particular situation and remedies that we can take to prevent that exact sort of thing. The study I was quoting here is, of course, as I said, focused more on physical and cybersecurity. So we didn't focus particularly on natural events. You bring up a great case. I can say on behalf of DTE Energy, we are putting millions and millions of dollars, anybody know the number? It's a lot of money, into the quick restoration of customers that are out due as a result of a storm. We are putting a lot of money into notifying those customers, finding different channels for being able to notify them, whether it's a text message, a phone call, an email. We're putting a lot of money into doing a better job of estimating, because we were horrible at telling you we'd be back in 24 hours and then 72 hours later you were still out. So we are putting a lot of money into our software systems in order not only to do a better job of that, but predict it. So we're using some predictive software as we see these storms coming to where are the outages going to be, so that we can pre-station restoration teams out in those areas. So that's a great question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm an electrical engineer and a computer scientist, and I also have an interest in alternative energy. So my question is kind of related to the previous one. There has been a lot of talk, especially with the Department of Energy putting out a lot of incentives and interest out to bring up the green energy and alternative energy
Yes.
sectors. As part of that effort, and also as part of maybe disaster recovery for the energy grid itself, let's say that we're talking that it's been a cyber attack and the infrastructure is in place and stuff, we don't have to build that from scratch. Has the United States thought of subcontracting with countries, friendly countries across the globe, maybe for solar or
Right.
power lines under the
Right.
ocean, or
Right.
what's the situation right now? Is that possible?
So I'm not an electrical engineer, I announced. But it is not possible, as I understand it, to be able to send electricity from Europe to the United States. In fact, the United States is broken up into 4 electrical regions. And it takes a lot to get energy from one of those regions to another, which is why they were designed that way. So DTE is building a lot of wind farms throughout the state of Michigan for 2 reasons. One, primarily, is it's a greener technology. And secondly, could provide backup in the case of the loss of a coal plant or stuff. So, but no, we're not looking at friendly countries across the ocean to wheel us electricity. One more, or am I done?
I was just curious, with the proliferation of smart meters, what kind of impact does that have on security for?
Excellent. Excellent question. There is a lot of press out there about smart meters and having access to people's usage information, and those smart meters being able to be hacked and to be brought down. The state government ran an exercise where there was a time bomb planted in a smart meter, and that all went off a year later, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Being in the security space and having been around when those smart meters came in, I can tell you that DTE Energy, and I'm sure it's true for the other utilities, have put a lot of money into securing those devices. We have our own team that worries about it. We have taken the smart meters to third parties to have them, their vulnerabilities. We took it out to INL as an example to see if they could break it, and if they could, we insisted that the vendor fix it. We've had outside auditors like PwC come in and evaluate our programs. So can I guarantee you that they're absolutely solid, safe? No, I can't even guarantee that. I can't guarantee that about anything. But I can tell you that DTE Energy, along with the rest of the electric sector, takes those vulnerabilities very, very seriously. And thank you for that question. I think that's it.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.